Okay, everyone, we're currently live on YouTube. I don't think we need to start the meeting quite yet. Maybe allow a few more minutes for people to trickle in. Going to go ahead and give a briefer that I've already given to some of you. If you could locate the mute button, that would be helpful. At times when you're not speaking, it's probably best to keep yourself muted. That way we don't get any sound loops or any pickup from your microphone and speakers. There is a option to raise your hand in the chat. That way, if say John is presenting and you have a question or a comment, if you raise that hand, we will see it in the chat. And then John should see it as well, and I can bring it to his attention if he doesn't see it. And he can call on you to ask your question. I think a helpful way to think about the mute button is to think of it like a radio. Receive and send. If you're unmuted, that means you're not receiving or speaking, and then mute it to receive.
Would you let me in?
I can, yes. Doc, were you able to get in touch with Commissioner Thornton?
Nope.
It may be helpful, Doc, to okay.
Got it now. Are you sure you're streaming on?
Yes, we are live. We are 2 minutes and 30 seconds into our live stream.
All right, because I'm not getting anything.
I will check it on my. It's probably because YouTube is blocked in the county offices.
Yeah, but I signed in on my phone.
Are you connected to Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
That's why the county Wi-Fi is blocking it.
Yeah, but I'm not connected to it. I'm connected to a hotspot.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm able to pull it up on my phone.
Got it on your phone, Kevin?
Yep, I have it on my phone.
Okay. Yeah. My end then. Y'all can keep looking at the ceiling and keep dropping my cell phone. I see Paige laughing at me.
I'm trying to figure out what you're doing.
My phone keeps sliding down.
Chairman, I would recommend maybe giving it 4 more minutes or so.
Okay, that'd be fine.
I don't want to delay us too much, but I certainly want to give people an opportunity to join.
Kevin, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Commissioner Thornton. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you. How do you turn on the, sorry to have trouble getting in. How do you turn on the video?
Are you on a smartphone or a computer?
Computer.
Towards the bottom of your screen, there should be something that says stop video or start video.
Okay.
Now, I don't see, normally when the camera has been disabled, there's a red line through it. However, your camera does not have a red line through it. That might mean that there's an issue with your webcam device. I'm unsure.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure everybody wants to see me, so, but you may
We can
get
hear
a
you,
chance this time.
I'm going to attempt to do it myself from here and see if that updates it.
Security.
Hey, Kevin,
Yes, sir.
you talked with Dr. Gorman earlier today, and he told me he wasn't going to be able to make it tonight.
I just received an email from him notifying me. Thank you. Commissioner Thornton, it may be the case that you need to allow video permissions for your camera or the Zoom application.
Mhm. I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Sure, it may be the case that you need to accept some permissions for the application. You might have a pop-up that says allow video or something of that nature.
Okay, I'll look for that, but don't wait on me. I can
Sure.
see and hear all of you.
Very good. And we can hear you. We're receiving you well.
Okay, great.
We do have a quorum. Mr. Chairman, it's 5:10. I think we've allowed enough time for people to join. If you want to go ahead and call the meeting to order.
And this time can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Everybody can hear me? Okay, okay. We're gonna call a meeting to order for the Edgefield County Land Management Ordinance Steering Commission meeting. Appreciate all of you coming. Time we have invocation. Father, we thank you for the opportunity for us to meet under the condition that we're in, and we thank you, Heavenly Father, for taking care of us during the time of the virus. We pray that you will guide us throughout this meeting, that we can do what pleasing in that side. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We need approval of the agenda for May 7th, 2020 Steering Committee meeting. Want to give me approval for that?
You may
I'll
be
make a
mute.
motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Second
All
motion.
in favor? Did I get a second?
Second.
Johnson, Mr. Johnson. All in favor said approval of the minutes. We won't raise the hand, we say aye. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposers? Opposers nay? Okay, it approved. Now we need approval of the minute for February the 25th Steering Committee minutes. You want to give me an approval for that minute?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Second?
Second motion.
Motion is second. All in favor, know by aye.
Aye.
Opposers? Ayes have it. Now we'll go down to old business, which would be the draft chapter 2 of the zoning district and land use. The consultant team that prepared a draft of chapter 2 zoning and so forth with that, and this time we're going to turn it over to John.
Hi, I'm here. Thank you. I'm going to share screen. So we should have this up here. PowerPoint slideshow. You should have that up now. If you don't, just let me know. But this is the Zoom online meeting on May 7, 2020. And this is just a catch up first in terms of the status of the draft. And just a reminder again, this is all based on the 2019 comprehensive plan, which was adopted last year. The comprehensive plan shows the land uses as they are proposed. And we are hoping that the zoning ordinance itself would have some very similar and recognizable features to it. Today, what I wanted to go through first is that there are 12 articles that are part of this plan. And as part of the discussion tonight, we have 3 completed draft chapters. And those are Articles 1, which is adoption, purpose, and applicability. Article 2, which is the zoning district's establishment. And Article 7, which is signs. These include 2 of probably the most complex sections that have the most significant changes that you'll see in going from the existing ordinances to the land management ordinance. As part of that, chapter 1 is pretty straightforward. It gives you the title and authority, the adoption process and validity, including an effective date. When you do adopt, you do not have to necessarily adopt that it goes into effect immediately. You can set a term for when this actually would go into effect. You also have the purpose of the land management ordinance and how it relates to the comprehensive plan. You have the applicability, that this applies specifically to the unincorporated portions of the county. It also identifies where exemptions may apply, such as for federal and state property, which may properties which may not have to meet the specifics of the process. And then we will have a section on nonconformities, and this relates to those that may be existing and would not conform with the new structure requirements or lot requirements or sign requirements or use requirements. So that is provided in chapter 1 as to where we find that to be addressed. Come on, wake up, machine. I gotta go down, I guess. There we go. Chapter 2 is the zoning districts and the land use. The articles include the conformity with the zoning district regulations and the establishment of the zoning districts as we have proposed. You've seen most of these at the last meeting. There will be an official zoning map, which is being prepared by the county. That is, as we edit through that, the GIS element will be what we are looking to adopt. The purpose of the zoning districts, the uses allowed in each zoning district, and then there is a principal use table. The principal use table will include sections regarding what's allowed, what's conditional, and what is special exceptions. When we get down to the use table, I'll let Paige describe a little bit of what we mean by that. It will also identify what uses are prohibited and how we interpret those uses. As part of chapter 2, we have identified essentially 12 districts. 8 of those, I believe, 8 or 9, I can't remember, are specific zoning districts. We will also have 2 special zoning districts for planned development and 3 overlay districts for corridor overlays, for airport compatibility, and for flood hazard protection. We'll get into that when we get into chapter 2. What this does is it changes the existing number of zoning districts from 3 rural to 3 proposed in the LMO effort. And the thing you see a little star there. When we discussed this at the last meeting, we identified one use, residential estate district. And the residential estate district, after discussions with staff and with the consultants, we are changing that title to rural estate district. So that's why there are 3 rural districts. There are 3 new residential districts. 2 commercial districts, 2 industrial districts, 2 planned development districts, and 3 overlay districts. So it's a total of 15. This is the big change that you'll see that occurred when we went through and looked at what we were talking about under a state district. The rural estate district was essentially the area that was 2-acre minimum lot sizes. When we got to discussing this with county staff, we felt that this district is much more rural in nature. And one of the things you'll find when we set up this plan is that we really have what I would call a mixed use or mixed uses when we talk about rural areas. Part of that is because there are significant horizontal differences that can be provided that may not be appropriate within a residential district. But the rural district was defined a little bit differently. You'll see that that also has implications in how some of these requirements, especially the use requirements, are applied. You'll also see it has an important element in terms of how it's affected by the sign ordinance proposal. This is the draft zoning map as it currently exists. The disclaimer is that this is the county's staff prepared draft. It is a work in progress. It is not a final draft by any stretch of the imagination yet. But you can see that majority of the county is into 3 rural areas, 3 rural types of districts. The yellows and the light orange are the residential districts. Then we have planned unit development and planned residential development, which would occur in the light blue, light service commercial. Planned residential development is shown in a darker orange. General service commercial is shown in the darker blue. And then light industrial and general industrial are also shown on this map. As I said, this is still working. You can see that the cities are areas of no zoning. Chapters 3 through 6, these are not completed text yet, but we're working on that. Special development districts are in chapter 6. The restrictions on particular uses will be in chapter 3. Chapter 4 is restrictions on particular uses. Chapter 5 is environmental protection, and chapter 6 is lot and building standards. Chapter 7, we do have a good draft, we believe, that probably gives you everything you could possibly want and more. So I think our discussion may be to determine what is appropriate within the entire county as part of the sign ordinance. Some pieces may be put back into the planned unit districts or the overlays, where there may be additional restrictions or specifics that are desired for signage in those areas. Chapters 8 through 12. Chapter 8 is the project design and construction standards, which sets out the minimum requirements for construction. Chapter 9 is the process, the procedures and permits requirements. Chapter 10 is administration and enforcement. Chapter 11 is appeals and how you can appeal the process. And chapter 12 is interpretation and definitions. We did think that the definitions may wind up being an appendix. There may be a short definition section in chapter 12, but then they'll lead right into the full glossary of definitions that are used in terms of review of this document. The LMO, I just want to make sure that everybody understands the LMO is still a working draft. Nothing has been adopted. As a working draft, it needs to be specifically edited to be appropriate to Edgefield County. Kevin is the primary person who's taking questions and comments, and then he's forwarding that to the consultant team. One of the things that we're concerned is we want to make sure we can pick up all of the issues, and between the committee, Kevin, Doc, Tommy, and all of my team, we want to make sure that we meet all the requirements that you are looking for us to include. All elements will be reviewed by the LMO committee. Then they go to the planning commission for review and action. The planning commission will review, hold a public hearing, and make recommendations regarding the draft to County Council for review and action. The County Council will review the draft, and I believe that there will be at least 3 readings. One of those will be a public hearing. Appropriate edits can be introduced at any point through through those readings. And then the County Council will determine the dates for when this will be implemented. And at the same time it's implemented, there will be a repeal of existing ordinances on that same date, maybe at 12 midnight on the day. And then the County Council will approve the adoption of the final ordinance. Just to ensure that everybody understands, as far as this document is concerned, this is still a work in progress. May 26th is the next meeting that's scheduled. And if anyone has questions or comments, then they should talk to Kevin Singletary at 803-637-2101 or by email at ksingletary@edgefieldcounty.sc.gov. And then I go back here. Okay. Stop share.
That's all you have on that, John?
That's the review. We can move right on to chapter 2 now.
Okay.
And let me just share that screen up. I've got to get up here. Escape this one. I'll get that up right here.
Just to make sure everyone is following along, we're at old business item A, draft 2, draft chapter 2, zoning districts and land uses, having concluded John's quick presentation.
As discussed in our presentation, chapter 2, you've seen the draft of chapter 2 briefly at, I believe, our February meeting. And we have done just a little bit of editing. The primary change is on 2.2.1.3, the RE district, we have renamed that the rural estate district rather than residential estate. We changed those terms within the draft document. We wanted to emphasize that the physical map it will be developed by the staff. Doc at one point was asked, we thought he would make some crafting of some language on 2.3.3.5, but I believe that Doc has, and Kevin and I have agreed that the language is okay for this document at this point. On 2.4.1.6.1, the RV district, we wanted to make sure that what we changed on it was that the district also allows mixed uses that are conditioned to a site plan approved by the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission will be the arbiter of that RV district as to the site plan. Now, County Commission still will adopt whether or not the plan is done. Principal use table, there are in 2.6. Under the principal use table, there are 3 types of uses. One is what's allowed by right. That's called A, and you'll see that on the use table. C is with as under conditions, and the C means that the principal use is conditionally allowed, subject to meeting applicable requirements that are stated in the land management ordinance. These requirements will be noted in the right-hand column of the table of uses. S is special exception, and that means that the principal use is allowed only by approval as a special exception. A listed special exception is one which may be granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals only when certain conditions are met in accordance with the special exception process described in Chapter 9 of this ordinance. This relates back to state legislation regarding how you can look at approval of a special exception, which is required from our understanding to go through the Board of Zoning Appeals. Then it also identifies that blank just means that it's not allowed use. There is some interpretation of uses that will be allowed as part of this. Now I'm going to move on to here, the principal use table. Paige, did you want to talk a little bit about how you came up with the principal use table? And before you do, this table has been reviewed thoroughly by Paige, myself, by Doc, and by Kevin. And this is as it stands after our recommendations. This is not the final table. This is a table that's still in process and progress. Paige?
So the table, and John, are you able to pull up, do you have that readily available, just the first page as an example?
Yeah, let me make sure this is sharing. I have to put it over here. And share screen.
Appreciate it.
It should show. Everybody seeing that?
Not yet. Let's see.
Try it this way.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to have this up as a reference for all of us to be looking at the same thing. John, you did a great overview of what the legend means when we talk about A versus S versus C in the table. This isn't altogether different than what the county currently has. The county uses a fairly detailed use table that's NAICS based, and I mean by that, on the far left column, you'll see a series of numbers up to 6 digits. The NAICS is the North American Industry Classification System. It's a federal standardized numbering system for businesses. And the NAICS manual itself goes into great detail in breaking out types of businesses. And so in crafting use tables for principal uses for the principal building on a site, it's a very beneficial reference in helping to identify and break down detailed uses. It's not going to necessarily cover everything under the sun, but it helps from an administration standpoint to, as you can see through 20 plus pages, to get down to the most common and then less common uses that are out there. It begins with agricultural uses, and what we've done is we've broken out the uses, we've grouped them by different use types. And so it starts with agricultural uses, and then the residential uses follow. Institutional uses come after that. And when we mean institutional, we're talking about only public uses. So schools may be addressed, I'm sorry, only private uses, as the county doesn't regulate public schools. But when we talk about private schools and where they may locate, churches, et cetera, that's under institutional uses. Hospitals, as you can see, is another example. That's followed by getting into more typical commercial uses, beginning with retail trade. Commercial services follows. And then we get into office uses, and then arts, entertainment, and recreation. There's a whole slew of examples of different types of recreation. When you see tennis courts, that's one example. We're not talking about, or a pool. We're not talking about a pool in someone's backyard or a pool that's part of a neighborhood. This is a standalone, perhaps private aquatic center. That's a commercial venture. And then finally, the much more intensive uses, manufacturing, your industrial type uses, and then transportation and communications, such as cell towers, where do they go? So you can see that there's a whole long laundry list, if you will, of uses. And the legend recurs in the header as a reminder as to what everything means. And as John said, anything that's allowed by right, there's no additional review by any other body. As long as the use meets the basic requirements in the land management ordinance, or if it meets some additional criteria, anything that's in the ordinance itself, then it means it's good to go. The C for conditional uses means it's allowed, but there may be additional restrictions or additional details that have to be met. They are objective, black and white criteria that staff can just check off as someone comes in before pulling any permits. And then S is a new classification. As John touched on, this is a mechanism available to communities through the state where there may be uses that are potentially appropriate in a district. They may be okay, but there may be something about it where it shouldn't be automatically allowed by right, but there may be an opportunity for, as the state allows through an appeals board, the BZA, to hear with a public hearing as part of the process to consider what an applicant proposes. And so there can be a detailed discussion about parking and what the use entails, and are there any issues with site lighting, screening, or buffers, are they appropriate? And so that's where we assign an S, where again, it's not that it's necessarily inappropriate for an area or district, but it warrants additional review and public input. And then finally, blank, as we currently have it, it just means it's prohibited outright. The far right column is currently used for our internal review. The far right column is going to be replaced ultimately with section numbers that will take the reader to specific additional standards that apply. It'll tell you where to go within the document so the user can understand that there may be additional standards that need to be met specific to their use. The examples here with real estate office, C, conditional use. Maybe we want to integrate requirements that if something locates in an area where there are residences, then the office has to look residential in character. And those would be the black and white criteria that would be specified in the LMO. John, if you don't mind going back to the top, the first page, because that just explains some of the our internal thinking of just so we can keep track to know where, if certain conditions don't currently exist for uses, then we need to create those. So that's what was denoted with the C in the far right column. Let's see, if there is an asterisk, that's another one, like a bed and breakfast or townhomes. Those are sort of very straightforward additional criteria that applies that already are in the land manager, already in your codes, and will carry over. Like a B&B can only serve breakfast. So that just means that there are going to be some additional standards that we need to be mindful of that staff will review as someone comes in. Oh, sorry.
Paige, can I make a quick interjection with that?
Yeah.
The asterisk also could denote that we believe that in the LMO, additional requirements may be needed for the development of those uses that may not already exist within the current ordinance. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so that's why part of this is for our internal review as this evolves. We want to be mindful of those where standards don't exist, that, you know, maybe this is something that those will be crafted and will be inserted into the appropriate article. And so in AA then in the far right, and NA generally, and let me know, Kevin, if I'm misspeaking, generally means that, you know, it's incumbent on staff to just do the basic review if someone comes in, making sure that a use is adhering to, or what's proposed is adhering to the standards, either the basic standards or enhanced standards that are presented in the ordinance itself. And then if there is a blank space, so if you don't see anything, generally that means that the Planning Commission they, as the state tells us, it's only the BZA that can approve special exception uses, but the Planning Commission in your current process reviews land development applications. So before pulling a building permit, there are certain type of developments that warrant Planning Commission review and approval. And so again, that's just kind of another internal mechanism for us to be mindful of in the overall process that'll be presented in another article, that there are going to be several uses that they are allowed, but we know that their site plans need to go forward for review and approval by the Planning Commission. So that's sort of the overall with the methodology. I don't know if there's anything, Kevin, more specifically to how this was developed as far as the application of certain uses that you want to touch on, or how the uses are applied or allowed, or from your perspective of someone who's going to be administering this and how you use it, if you want to weigh in on that.
I think you accurately described how we've been monitoring these and denoting them internally. To somewhat build off what Paige said, this will be helpful when we're in the drafting of those specific articles that she mentioned, when we start talking about the development process for particular uses as well as broadly speaking. One of the ways in which staff thought about this table was also to consider uses. So for example, one of the more unique ones that we denoted was the AA, meaning administrative approval. Those are being things typically, most of them are agricultural in nature, where there's really nothing that is needed to approve, the farming of land until you get into livestock per se at a commercial scale. So those were just to give you an example of some things. I see Tommy has a hand raised. I'm going to unmute you, Tommy.
Thank you. I just, at what point can we ask questions or comments?
We're open. I have one
Yeah.
more comment before we do.
Okay.
After Kevin. Kevin, anything else?
Nope, I can conclude it there.
Because we have some people who are going to be watching this on YouTube, I wanted to make sure that it's reasserted here. These are talking about the primary uses.
Right.
Accessory uses such as crop production or anything else that's on this list, they still are allowed as accessory uses. So the biggest issue on this is that we may not be looking for a beef cattle on our L district, but it could be allowed as an accessory use, given what the conditions are for the property and the primary use that the property owner is trying to pursue on that. So the idea that this allows or does not allow an accessory use is totally not there. This is talking primarily about the primary use on these properties. Now we're open for questions.
All right. Paige, when she was going through the use table and got to schools, made the statement that we don't control the location of our public schools or something to that effect. In South Carolina, we have no control over the building, the construction portion, and inspections of the public schools. Where they are located at, what zoning district they're located at, we do have control over. That is a local zoning issue. And we need to include schools, our public schools, on the zoning table as well as I noticed on here, private correctional facilities. All of our county offices, all of our state offices, local government are also regulated by the zoning ordinance.
Okay, well, we can, thank you, Tommy, for that reminder. And an easy fix is we'll strike the word private. So that's all encompassing then, whether it's schools or other that you just cited.
more questions?
Everyone, please remember that you are muted. And if you do have a question, you'll need to unmute yourself.
I just want to make a comment. I think the chart was very, very well condensed and put together. And even a 5-year-old could really come in and just read that thing and go from, go from there. So it was very, very well put together.
Any more questions? Comments? I guess, you have anything else on that, John?
Your next situation would be to determine whether there is any action on this part of or chapters 2 at this time. We've already gotten the information that we will look at adding the public schools in addition to the non-public schools. This is still open for comments. And what we would like is that if everyone is agreeable at this stage, we can proceed with the other chapters based upon chapter 2 being in general what you're looking to try to accomplish as part of the LMO. We're not looking for a specific level of detail yet. And I believe that there may be some wordsmithing that can still be done. But if it's the pleasure of the LMO committee, we can move forward with using this as the current draft and then moving on to the other chapters.
Okay, we have any comment, any objection on that? I mean, that on the committee. So the recommendation here that are you gonna, the zone, I had listed here zoning map, is that part of that discussion too, or that we not?
Yes, I almost forgot that. Hold on.
That would be secondary.
Second.
So I think the consensus is that the current text of the draft of chapter 2, as well as the use table, is not offensive to the committee, and there are no issues that you, as a committee, believe need to be resolved at this time. Obviously, Tom pointed out, for example, some finer details that still need to be addressed, but it is my interpretation that, since we're not having discussion, that we can move forward on those items knowing that we're headed in the right direction, and which leads into the draft zoning map to see if the committee finds that to be the appropriate direction as well. If you could, John, we could bring up the zoning map.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now.
I can briefly discuss it.
Let's bring this up. See if you'll let me share it. That up? It's
Okay,
up on my screen.
Could you possibly scroll down? There you go. Thank you, John. I hate to preference any portion of the county, but if perhaps you could zoom out so that we could see the key as well as where we have the most fluctuation in terms of zoning districts, which would be the Meriwether area and along 25. Might be easier to zoom out.
Yeah, I did. I zoomed out. Let me try move document around a little bit.
Well, while John's preparing that, one thing that I would encourage you to do now that we have a draft use table is to take a look at a portion of the county, note its zoning, and then imagine what you think would be appropriate to develop there, what would be an appropriate use in that zoning category, and then see how it's marked on the use table. That was something that staff used heavily in terms of trying to work on the use table was, well, what have we done so far with our draft zoning map in terms of identifying, properties throughout the county. It's currently in a draft phase. If you know of any specific properties that you would want to alter and have in a state or a zoning, I should say, different than what is shown, certainly take note of that and share it with us. as it currently stands, staff feels pretty comfortable with this map and certainly would like to get the committee's thoughts on it. I know that this is the same map that you reviewed back in February. There's been one minor alteration, which is we've updated the residential estate zoning to the new name of rural estate.
That's the legend that's up right now. And because we are trying to find opportunities to look at as much of this as possible. Now let me see if I can move this thing back over this way. One of the things that you see here is that the rural estate is that light green color that you see there. Rural conservation is the medium green. Then up in the top left corner of my screen shows is rural agricultural. And you can see that this is still a very tight area around Meriwether. We'll move up a little bit further. And we're really looking at a lot of the higher categories, the more intensive categories would be along the US 25 corridor to the north. Let's take this back up a little bit. I know that a copy of this has been submitted to the LMO committee, and they're certainly there as soon as there's an opportunity. I'm sure Kevin can share it with people if they will be able to, once they're able to come into the office. This is showing the areas around Edgefield and Johnston. You look in the northern end of the county, we are talking about mostly rural agricultural. Bring this back down a little bit. Anybody else with any more comments? I'll take it off screen. We've been ready to move on to new business.
Yeah, and if no objection, we're going to new business with chapter 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll close this down. Escape and close that down. And now I'm going to bring up chapter 1. Chapter 1 is actually a very brief chapter. It's essentially the introduction to the ordinance. Is chapter 1 up showing on the screen?
Not at this moment, John.
Okay, let me try it again. Need to share. I struggle sometimes to make sure it's sharing.
Sure. We now have your screen open. We're looking at the use table.
Okay. Okay, let me close this. Pull that down. Is that not showing the chapter 1?
I believe you might have exited out of it.
How about that?
There we go.
All right. Yeah, it's an issue with my second screen is what the issue was. Okay. There's chapter 1. I think it's very brief again. The adoption process, the conflict with other regulations needs to be included. The validity, that this is validity of land management ordinance as a whole. The effective date, there's a blank right there, and when the chapter is adopted, that will be filled in based upon that their decision at that point. Then the purpose is to provide land management and to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. These are requirements that are part of the State Enabling Act. The applicability is that it applies only to lands, structures within the quote unincorporated areas of Edgefield County. There are some exemptions here that are part of the requirement. These, for the most part, are consistent with the existing ordinance. Nonconformities in general, there are certain uses that may be identified as nonconforming. This essentially provides the definitions for what is a nonconforming use. It also provides the conditions for what is a nonconforming structure. It provides the conditions for what is a nonconforming lot. And then a nonconforming sign is consistent with what's in Chapter 7. Any comments regarding Chapter 1?
It looks, to me, well, a good draft there on that.
I'm attempting to unmute you, Tommy. All right, you're live.
Well, Fab was talking. Go ahead, Fab.
Oh, to me, it looks, in order, it looks good to me. I think they're well set up, well planned as far as I can see right now.
And John, I like the way it's formatted, the way everything's done. My one question is for the purpose of the land management ordinance found in 1.3.1. And I go to section 6. It helps to sit at your desk where you have your computer, look stuff up.
Yeah.
6-29-710 of the state code lists the purposes in South Carolina for the zoning ordinance. And there's 8 on there, and then there's 8 here. But the ones in the proposed ordinances are a little bit different, and some of them in the state code aren't necessarily reflected in ours. And I was just wondering why we didn't just cut and paste from the state code into our code.
That's just us trying to put it together. I believe that we can make those edits without a problem.
Okay, I didn't think it'd be a big deal, but I just wanted to mention that because if we had to defend it, I think we'd be in a better defensible position if we copied code. Thank you.
Kevin, you any comments on it? Which you've probably seen it.
I do not have any comments on it. Chapter 1 to me is fairly cut and dry. I think one thing that's important that we may want to have discussion around for Chapter 1 is nonconformities. There will be, as a nature and just a fact of adopting new zoning ordinances, we are going to create some nonconformities. Those would be considered legal nonconformities in that, they were approved or erected at a time prior to the adoption of this ordinance, and they are allowed to continue as such. I think the plan for this process is to maintain it the way the current ordinance is, where if something ceases operation or is demolished or left vacant for a period of 6 months or longer, that grandfather protection would be lifted from a property, and anything new or moving into the place of something that was once non-conforming would have to comply with the current ordinance, the LMO.
Okay, all right. Any more comments? I suggest we move on. Well, a good recommendation there. Action on that.
Yeah,
go ahead.
We can proceed with the comments that we have, which are to coordinate the list of the purposes under land management ordinance with the state code, and also to consider the nonconformities. I'm sure that Kevin is correct that there will be nonconformities that are created. We believe that we've caught the basic issues in section 1, but there's going to be a lot more that's going to have to come into some of the other sections as well. There are other articles.
Okay, that'll be fine, and we can go along with that.
Okay. Next, I'm going to put this down, close it temporarily.
Is Bill going to do our sign on chapter 7?
Yeah, if you can open up Bill's opportunity there. All right. Bill, if you would.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you.
Okay.
A couple of preliminary comments here. This is a situation where you're not dealing with state law nearly as much as the U.S. Supreme Court. And they have taken a major role in sign ordinances because they define these, or they feel that they come under the free speech of the Constitution. I could compare it to naked dancing, which is also free speech, but I don't know what those women are actually trying to say, but I do know what a sign is trying to say. And what we tried to do here is we just tried to cover the waterfront. Every possible kind of sign we could think of, freestanding, major signs, temporary signs, everything is covered, so that the idea is there are no signs that people can go out and slip in there because they're not being regulated. I think we've covered everything. But in the process of doing that, this is everything in the kitchen sink. I have a tendency to just put everything into sign ordinances because it's easier to take stuff out than to try to think of what did you forget to put in. Now this is written as though it applies to the entire county, all signs throughout the county. And your basic sign ordinance will do that. But as John indicated, there are parts in here that maybe the general countywide requirement should be a little less restrictive, and that more restrictive conditions or sign requirements would go into, for instance, the corridor areas or some of the special zoning districts. So that hasn't been decided yet. So everything is in here to the maximum amount. Now, when the U.S. Supreme Court stepped into the picture and decided this was all free speech and covered by, constitutional rights, that basically meant two things. One is that every jurisdiction that adopts signed ordinances has to justify what they're doing in the public interest. And John, if you go up to the top or the beginning of the ordinance, you'll see findings, purpose, and intent. We have to say, not just in general, but in Edgefield County, we are concerned about specific problems that signs can create. You're driving down the road, you'll be distracted. It's related to traffic safety and that sort of thing. And we even quote some studies that have been done by various experts talking about safety impacts there's even, that's not a mistake, that public purpose of Roswell's sign ordinance, that's Roswell, Georgia. We use that all the time because Jerry did a really good job just covering the waterfront on the public purpose. What is the public purpose? The second thing that being a free speech item is what has really made these ordinances complicated and long, and that is they have to be content neutral. What that means is simply if you have to read the sign to know what kind of a sign it is and how to regulate it, then you're stepping on free speech. That is not content neutral. So we can regulate the size, the shape, the height, the color, the design, all kinds of, setbacks, location on a property, wall signs versus freestanding signs. But we just have to do somersaults so that we don't say what the sign says. Easy example, somebody wants to put a sign on their property because their house is for sale. Right now, in most ordinances, the ordinance will say, well, you can put a for sale sign in your property. Problem is, you got to read it to know that it's a for sale sign. You can't say that. We can say, and this ordinance treats those kinds of temporary situations by defining the temporary event. For instance, we define the period during which a property is for lease or for sale. And during that temporary period, you can put a sign, an additional sign on your property. We can't say what that sign says. And we define, well, when does the period start? When does the period end? In the case of real estate, of course, is when you put your house on the market or for lease, the temporary event begins. When you sell it or lease it, it's over. During that period, you can have a sign. Now, be aware that sign can say, eat at McDonald's. It could even say, eat at McDonald's down the street, turn left at the light. We just can't say what the sign says, but we're confident that when people have their house for sale, that's what they're going to put up. When somebody's having a business grand opening, that's what they want to do. So those are all those temporary sign regulations in there. Last, and I'll repeat really what John said. These are countywide right now. This occurs to everybody at the same level of detail, but that we may, as the LMO evolves, decide, well, we should be more restrictive along the highways than on some of the local roads or something like that. But this is everything in the world. Now, everybody who's read this ordinance and actually stayed awake, I'll be surprised. But it is long, it is involved, but it's just very, very technical to address the U.S. Supreme Court rulings on these signs. That's about all I have to say about this in general. If anybody's got any questions or comments.
Yes, I have a question, comment. And I don't know if you have done this, John, but how do those regulations and so forth compare with, i.e. City of North Augusta, Aiken County, and Columbia County?
Bill?
I didn't quite hear the end of the question.
How do those particular sign section compare with the neighboring counties, the City of North Augusta, Aiken County, and Columbia County?
I have looked at a number of sign regulations in South Carolina. I believe I looked at North Augusta. I didn't study them in detail. I looked especially at their definitions, but many of those ordinances are not content neutral. They are just waiting for some disjointed, unhappy developer or business person to bring a suit, and that's going to be a federal suit. They're not going to worry about state court on these things. So we are bulletproofing Edgefield County, and I haven't looked at all the sign regulations throughout the state, but the ones I did have some issues, and I'm sure that somewhere along the line, folks will be amending their own regulations as they go along. I saw some very, very good provisions. In fact, we inserted a number of definitions that are consistent with other counties. Some of the definitions were very, very good, and coordinated those, of course, with the Edgefield counties also definitions to make everything just cover every possible eventuality.
So good. So in other words, we're being proactive instead of reactive in ensuring that we're staying out of trouble in the future.
You're right. Being reactive on signs means you're going to be paying lawyers a lot of money.
Okay.
If I could somewhat respond to that, Mr. Freeman, the past handful of South Carolina American Planning Association chapter meetings have had legal updates, and the heavy focus within the legal updates has been issues with signs. That has been something that's been a hot button issue here recently, and definitely something, as Bill said, we want Edgefield County to be bulletproof on.
I think basically most counties I noticed the larger issue with that is the illumination, the lighting restriction on them. I think most counties cities have problem with that on some of these flashing signs and so forth. So I think I don't know how restricted we could be on that.
Well, I think in that retrospect, it will be maybe according to the location of them. And maybe if like in a higher residential or especially if they're in like a major intersection type deal, then I could see where that could cause a problem.
We do have a section in here on prohibited signs and things like moving signs, flashing signs, signs that look like traffic signals, and that sort of thing. There's that 7436 right there, the animated signs. You don't want signs that distract people's attention, and flashing lights and giant cowboys with waving arms and things like that. That's a safety hazard. That's why we try not to allow them. So you can see, and many of these, by the way, are already in your ordinance now as far as what you can't have. We were also very, very restrictive on billboards. Of course, the state has permitting authority over the U.S. highways, but the county is responsible on the smaller roads. And we were very restrictive. In fact, we're more restrictive along the U.S. highways on billboards, but the state allows you to do that. They say, these are their minimum requirements, but that localities can be more restrictive. And when someone applies for a billboard permit with the state contacts the county to be sure that it also meets the county's requirements. And the county's requirements are generally more restrictive than the state highway billboard requirements.
And I have a question for you. Does it say in here as to where, at what point do a customer or an individual citizen must have a permit from the county to erect the sign?
There are a number of types of signs that permits are not required, and they tend to be residential type uses that are just not really an issue. There may be a regulation associated with it, but as long as you conform to those regulations, then you don't have to get a permit. And that's 742, John, is the signs that are exempt from regulation. Yeah, these are signs that they're just exempt. Obviously, official government signs, display. Some people want to put a pumpkin in their yard or fly a flag on their flagpole for Easter. Those are holiday or seasonal events. They're not commercial in nature. Those are exempt. So there's a number of things that these regulations don't apply to at all. And John, go on up a little bit more to 732. these are signs that they're not exempt, but you don't need to get a permit from the county to do it. And again, some of this is already in your current ordinance, but like the non-illuminated sign less than 15 square feet, as long as it's not in the public right of way, which it can't be anyway, you don't need to come in and get a permit for that. Window signs that don't obscure the view into the store or the building, that sort of thing. Obviously, your street number is a sign now, but we're saying, we're not going to issue a permit so that you can put your address on your mailbox, something like that. So that's why I said earlier, this covers the waterfront, anything and everything that could be viewed as a sign. And a sign is basically something that kind of distracts your attention to convey a message. And so if you want to put a, Santa Claus in your yard at Christmas, you don't need to get a permit for that. So there are a bunch of things in here that if you've got a sign, it's just a small miscellaneous sign, but you're going to plug it in. It's going to have electrical service. You got to come in and get an electrical permit. Some signs you'll need a building permit, but by and large, miscellaneous type signs. I mean, miscellaneous type sign is just kind of a notice on a wall. Maybe it's the a credit card symbol on the front door to a business. Things like that. They're just miscellaneous. We're not going to try to permit all of those little things. Something small, 1.5 square feet. So there's a lot of things that you don't have to get permits for. And they tend to be the kinds of things people put up and they don't even think about getting a permit. So you might not even have questions from people wondering if they do. But go down a little bit more, John. The flagpole down there. Oops, go back up. Where'd my flagpole go? Yeah, oops, go down. Oop, no, you were right. Go back up. Yeah, okay. A flagpole. Somebody has a flagpole in their yard. Doesn't require a sign permit to put up a flagpole and fly your flag from it. There are some restrictions on commercial use of flags and how big they can be and that sort of thing. So we don't end up with the 4-story flagpole with a 3-story flag hanging on it and that sort of thing, because that just becomes a distraction and a safety hazard for people driving around on the roads.
Any more comment, question on this?
I'm going to move down to 7.6 real quickly here because I was heading that direction before.
Okay.
Because I wanted to point something out. In 7.5, the requirements that apply to signs in general. There's some information here regarding multi-faced signs. And in 7.6, we wanted to make sure that there are some specific information regarding sign restrictions on agricultural land and on residential land and on non-residential land. There's some variations between the three. And we wanted to make sure that we pointed that out to you. They're covered under 7.7, 7.8, and 7.9.
And these are related back to that land use table that Paige was talking about, so that people can know exactly what are we talking about when we say residential or non-residential or agricultural signs. It refers you right back to the land use categories on that table. So it's easy to figure out which of these categories apply to a particular piece of property. We didn't associate it with zoning districts because those can vary. And many of the zoning districts allow both residential and non-residential uses. So it's hard to have a single sign requirement for a zoning district that has mixed uses. But if we just say, we don't care what your zoning is, if your land use is a non-residential use, here are the restrictions on that property. Right next door to you might be somebody's farm, an agricultural use. They would come under the agricultural sign requirements. A little ways down the road, somebody's got a house. It's a residential use. The residential requirements apply. So we don't care about your zoning. We care about what are you using that land for? And here are the various requirements and restrictions on those signs. And again, these are very consistent with your current sign ordinance with regard to size sign areas and that sort of thing.
Any comments, questions?
I got some questions if you're ready for them.
Always.
Simon, go ahead.
Here we go. And John, let me start out on, because I've read through this thing and have me some notes. So let's start out on page 7-3. And under the definition of a projecting sign. And I get the 8 inches for both projecting sign and wall sign. I think we need to have some diagrams in the code to help some illustrations would be helpful. And I look at the 8 inches from the wall surface, and to me that seems a little tight. I was used to working with 18 inches. Most of what I saw was 10 to 12 inches. So the 8 inches, I wanted to ask y'all about that. Was that maybe a typo, or has signs gotten closer to the wall in the last few years?
These on a wall sign, they're pretty much slap dab up against the wall. Now they do project forward a little bit because of the sign structure itself is attached to the wall, flat on it. The projecting signs, those are signs that go more than 8 inches out. We didn't give a maximum distance on that, but the 8 inches is just to differentiate a projecting sign from a wall sign. Which one is which?
Well, I think one is, I think you make a good point. I think there should be a limit on how far it could project out. And this is just my opinion.
Uh-huh.
But the other thing is whenever I think of a projecting sign, I think of something that's perpendicular to the wall.
Yeah.
And I think that's in the definition, or something that comes out at 45. Whereas a wall sign is flush up against the wall. And when you get the electrical, depending on how the sign is built, when you get an electrical chase behind it, now if they're putting letters on and the electrical's on the inside of the building, it's not an issue. But if you've got a box back there for the electrical and for the channel letters and things to fit on, I think 8 inches is tight. And
Okay.
that's my opinion.
Okay.
And then the other thing is G and H. I think you duplicated yourself.
Oh, yes. I think we were in the process of amending this thing. You see all in G, you see all that language that's underlined. I forgot to delete H in that process. Thank you for noticing that.
And then on page 7.5, it talks about historic impact area. Do we have a historic impact area in the county?
Okay, that's my page 7.6.
Okay, it's my 7.5.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, historic impact area. That, let me
And I-
turn the question back to y'all. I don't know. I don't think you do.
And I'm just asking, if we don't have one, do we need that definition? Do we
No.
need that?
I don't think so. Unless you're planning on having some.
And then, let me And then, let me see here. Do we prohibit off-site signs anywhere in here? And can we do that? Or is that regulating speech?
Oh, that's basically under billboards.
Okay.
See, the problem that the state can get away with talking about on-site and off-site signs because those things were adopted. Lady Bird Johnson and her highway beautification program, and every state in the nation copied those regulations from decades ago. The problem is, as I was talking about the content neutral, you can't tell a sign is on-site or off-site unless you read it. And
Well,
the Supreme Court has been knocking those kinds of signs down, but they've never really gotten into a billboard. Nobody wants to talk about billboards. So there, you can do a. In fact, the state law speaks primarily of off-site signs along the highways. They can get away with it. And if anybody ever gets excited about it, we send them to the state and say, go talk to them because they're the ones who have defined this thing. But we've avoided those terms, and in the billboard section, we just say, you have to comply with the state requirements. And oh, by the way, we've got a couple of our own in here.
okay. And I'll move on to 7.4.3.8. Handwritten, hand-painted, handmade, or other unprofessionally fabricated sign. A professionally hand-painted sign is one prepared or created by a person engaged in the paid occupation of sign painting and generally reproduced as font sets created. I know what you're trying to do there, but can we do that?
Yes. I mean, it's a matter of interpretation.
How do you define professional?
Somebody takes a magic marker and writes, "My property is for sale," puts it in the ground or whatever. They tend to be temporary, just sort of chalked up kinds of things. A lot of people do have hand painted signs, and when I say they're professionally made, they look good. They're using, they're printed, not handwritten. And they use typesets in the process. They may be hand lettered, but they're very carefully done. They're neat. They're tidy. They tend to be permanent. You see them quite often. People have a sign for just their logo and their business, and they put it up, and it looks just great. But we're trying to avoid the just really junky handwritten stuff. Tend to be on paperboard or something like that.
Okay. And
I've got a couple of examples, photographs of really nice professionally done, handwritten, handmade signs. I can put those in here as an example of, for instance, the following are considered professionally prepared.
And my concern is when Doc has to go out and enforce it, is it open to subjectivity?
Of course.
And we'll move on to 7.4.3.15.5 about searchlights.
Uh-huh.
Should there be a restriction in there of the number of how long they could use a searchlight? They're allowed with prior written approval by the county, can't create a nuisance and stuff, but it doesn't say how long Doc can allow them to, you know, to function.
Wait a minute, we were just jumping around. Okay, searchlights. They're allowed for special business promotions, grand openings, that sort of thing. And if you go to the temporary sign section, you'll see a whole section about when does a business promotion begin? When is it over? How long can it go? And it's during that period of time that a searchlight would be appropriate.
Gotcha. So we'd go back to that other section for the time limit.
Yeah.
All right.
And it might be a good idea to put in there that it's temporary or, you know, referred to that other section.
Okay.
And then, let me see. Double phase. Good there. On the height measurements, I'm at 7.5.4. And I understand why you use this.
Uh-huh.
This is coming from a guy that used to have to go out and measure the height every now and then. You're measuring out to the crown of the road.
Uh-huh.
Which means Doc and Kevin has to go out into the traffic. Could we put that measurement to the edge of the paved or the edge of the road surface?
Sure.
That keeps them out of the road, playing in the street. And I know some of this stuff's kind of picky. I don't. And on the residential subdivision sign, that's 25 square feet. Now, when you measure the signs, I forgot to look, on a double-sided sign, do you have that, if they're back to back, is that 12.5 on each side if it's 25, or is that 25 on each side?
That's 25 on each side.
Okay.
Where was that drawing, John? We actually drew a picture.
Okay.
That's for-
We had double faced, we had triangular.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is if you can easily see both sides of a two-sided sign at the same time, we define that as being more than a 60-degree angle, then that's one sign. It's two pieces of one sign. But if the interior angle is less than 60 degrees, which is, you know, on a triangular sign, that'd be equal sides. Then it's each face is considered a separate sign.
And then I'm looking at the residential subdivision entrance signs. It's 7.7.2. And 2.4 here says project signs shall not be located within the right of way of a public street giving access to the subdivision. So what we're doing there, and Doc may want to chime in, we of course don't want maintenance, but also of landscape median, but I'm thinking of an upscale neighborhood that whenever you turn in has a center median there with the sign and the landscape median in the middle, this would prohibit that, wouldn't it?
Yes, if that median is in the right of way,
Mhm.
that means the county's responsible for that sign. If somebody runs into it with their car, they're going to sue the county. So a workaround that a lot of developers do is that as their interior street approaches the public right of way, they split the lanes, and the median is left as a private property. Sometimes you'll see a wide median if they put a little guard shack out there or something like that. But that's sort of the workaround. The main thing here is liability, as opposed to just straight, safety. We just don't want the county getting sued because somebody ran into a subdivision sign.
And we don't want the maintenance of that median either, but that is what I was looking for, and that's what you was going for. So I'm good with that.
Uh-huh.
And that's about as far as I got into it.
You got a long way.
Some illustrations and some charts would be helpful though.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm thinking about charts with the different sign, what's allowed in the various districts would be helpful rather than having to read through all of it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm trying to think about the public that it isn't like Doc and Kevin that's in it every day. And I'll hush and leave you alone now.
No, that's fine. I appreciate your comments. These are great.
I got one question. Back to you was talking about the handmade sign, or would this be considered as a possible temporary sign? But is somebody gonna have like a yard sale on a big poster board, or they're gonna have like a fish fry on a poster board? Would that come up under the temporary sign, or what?
It would be a temporary sign, and we have some regulations in there about yard sales and whatnot. And you're right. Some people just take a piece of cardboard and a magic marker, and they write it, and of course they nail it on a electric pole or whatever. But you can also go down to the hardware store and you can pick up a plastic, yard sale sign. You do write in there your address, but at least it looks a whole lot better than the hand scratch kind of things.
Well, you got to remember we're talking about a rural county, so
Yeah. And you know very well that the staff doesn't drive the roads looking for illegal signs. Like so much of zoning enforcement, it's complaint driven. And if somebody hand letters a sign and puts it up on a temporary basis and nobody complains about it or notices it, the county's not going to run out there and try to find it. But if it is a problem or blocking the sight lines on a road or whatever, and somebody complains about it, it can be enforced.
Bill, do we need to include at 7.4.3.8 a reference to see temporary signs?
Which section were you at?
This is where it's talked about the handwritten, hand painted, 7.4.3.8.
Okay.
This is where you're specifically identifying handwritten, hand painted, handmade, or other unprofessionally fabricated signs.
Okay. What was your question?
Whether or not we could reference at this point the temporary signs.
Sure. Yeah, the photographs I usually use in this section are of actual permanent business signs. They look great. But we could also refer, that see also temporary signs and the restrictions, regulations on them. Yeah, sure.
Mr. Tommy, I got one question for you there in that section he has highlighted. With being a governmental entity as we are, do you think that last 4 words needed to be there?
The last 4 words of what?
Well, that's
7.3.8.
he's
Because
spec-
Oh,
And
and the reason why I said that is because they're specifying specific software programs.
And I understand that, but I think what they're doing is giving examples because it's Adobe, Microsoft, Bitstream, Apple, etc.
Okay.
If it had only those 4, yeah, I think we would have a problem there. But it's saying, something of that nature.
yeah, this is a such as opposed to it's actually got to look like it. In fact, Bitstream, I think, is out of business at this point, but they were a major foundry also.
I just added the words or other examples, etc.
There you go.
Because just like everybody talking about, they'll make a Xerox copy, type thing. Trying to keep the count out of the lawyer's office.
Understood.
any more comments?
I haven't heard the word murals discussed yet. And Edgefield County does have some really nice murals. I don't have any problems with them. I think they're an enhancement to a brick wall.
Yeah.
Or a barn or a building or something like that. So,
Now,
I mean, we've covered everything in 41 pages. I cannot believe there's not the word murals in there somewhere.
usually, from my experience on that, if it is a mural that's advertising the business, it would be a sign. If it is public art that is there for no purpose other than to beautify for the artwork and doesn't advertise the business, I've always looked at that as not signage. Now, we got the pros here. They may have another viewpoint on that, and Doc might as well.
Again, you gotta look at the sign and interpret what it says to regulate it. And that's not content neutral.
Right.
We can treat them all as wall signs. I included under the definition of a wall sign, it may be painted on the wall. I haven't made any distinction between, some sign made in a factory and screwed to the wall versus a mural or any other thing that's painted on there, as murals generally are. I just can't differentiate between whether they're art or have a business message on them, because we can't do that. All we can say is, something's painted on the wall. I'll look into that a little bit more deeply. I think one of the staff members raised the issue of murals not long ago, and we didn't really get into it because, again, my art and your art might look real different. But we can always tell something's been painted on the wall.
If I may, Bill.
Yeah.
We've talked about murals, and that's something we've thought about. I agree with Tommy's perspective that when it advertises for a business, at that point, it's a sign. I think the question that gets raised is when you start to get to a gray area. Say you have an ice cream parlor that paints on the side of their building a park scene that has people consuming ice cream on the mural. Is it a mural? Is it a sign? If it doesn't have the name of the business, or maybe it's a painting of ice cream cones. Those are the areas where it's not obvious if it's a mural or a sign. to me.
But
Uh,
you have to erase from your mind the idea of an advertisement, because you got to read it to know that it's advertising something, and that's not free speech. So trying to differentiate, you will see in here that I've defined personal speech and commercial speech, and defined them in very broad terms. And I've done it for two reasons. One is that the Supreme Court in some of their rulings have actually been more restrictive on what they've defined as commercial speech, and less restrictive on personal. In other words, people are more able to say whatever they want to say as opposed to a business. You don't see very many of the rulings that go along those lines because, again, it's kind of touching on content base. You gotta know what the sign is saying to determine how to regulate it. I think if we just treat all of these as wall signs, whether they're advertising or a beautiful work of art, or maybe a not beautiful work of art, we can't differentiate it. That's the way to go. You can have a wall sign or you can have a sign on a wall, whether it's painted on there or mounted on there or whatever. But we can't really say, this one's art and that one's advertising a business, because that's content-based regulation. It's a hard concept. Actually, even I have a trouble with it, trying to differentiate one from the other. But trying to, basically get completely reoriented to, I'm not looking at what it says. I'm not looking at what it is. Now, if it's, a naked woman, now we can get into obscenity. We can deal with that. But the rest of these, we can't get into the content in any way.
I've got another question when we get finished with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, I jumped over here to non-conforming signs, 7.11. And a non-conforming sign can stay until it's damaged beyond the control of the owner to an extent that it's more than minor repairs are required to restore the sign. And then it says in 7.11 3.3, a non-conforming sign may not be replaced by another non-conforming sign except where changed conditions were beyond the control of the owner rendered the sign non-conforming or warrant the sign's repair. So the way I read that is, if we get high winds come through, or a car runs into and knocks over the non-conforming sign, he can put a non-conforming sign back up.
Yes.
And is that what we want?
That I can't answer, but you were right the way you interpreted it.
And that's a question I just want to ask the committee, because non-conformities are there, but as non-conformities cease or certain things trigger, eventually you want everybody in conformity is the overall objective. So I just throw that out there for their comment.
Well, I know I understand what you're concerned on, because we don't want blighted signs, but like you just said, if somebody's car happened to run into it, well, now you're going to have people maliciously wanting to run into that sign just to knock it down to be beyond repair.
Well, the concept here is one of vested rights. And these non-conforming requirements kind of follow the regular non-conforming land uses in that, you know, if a business goes out of business for a certain amount of time, it can't be replaced with another non-conforming, you know, use. But if, you know, if the building burned down, well, generally there's an amount of damage, but if a building had a serious fire and needed a lot of repair, as long as it didn't exceed a certain amount, then the owner could repair it and continue the non-conforming use. Once it's completely destroyed, generally they can't. But what we're trying to get at here is it wasn't the owner's fault. That sucker burned, you know, blew down or fell over or whatever. And so, I can't answer the legal issue. Did the vested rights in that sign, were they extinguished when the sign blew over or not? And that's more a lawyer's question, but we can put in here whatever you want. We can say, we can put the percentage approach that a non-conforming sign is damaged, you know, such that its replacement or repair would exceed X% of the value of the sign in the first place, or requirements kind of along those lines. Then you got to get appraisals and whatnot, but at least it's a standard that says, you know, if it's damaged to a certain extent, you can repair it. If it's damaged beyond that extent, you can't replace it. It's gone. So we can put whatever we want to in here that the committee would be comfortable with.
And I'd really like the folks from the Planning Commission to chime in here and, you know, what do they think? Because that's the way we need to go, is, you know, not what I think, you know, and I understand where you're coming from. I get it. And that's what I'm used to seeing. But I hadn't heard much out of the planning, the other members of the committee.
Basically, my opinion, you got something that the owner didn't cause it. It was caused by some act or something, natural act or so forth, storm or so forth. It wasn't his fault when it was damaged. I don't think we should be within a reason. We got that 6 month period where we say, you replace it. As long as we stay within that bound, I think we should let it remain somewhere in that neighborhood to give it, be fair to the individual, that it wasn't something that he caused. He went down there and burned it down or something, but it was an act, natural act that would be beyond your control. I don't think we should be too restricted on it. That's my opinion. That wouldn't be.
In my opinion, if the sign comes down, the non-conforming sign comes down, I think that the new sign that goes up should conform to the new ordinance. That's my opinion.
You do have an opportunity to go before a variance on that, I believe.
You would, yes.
My opinion basically is that if it's an act of God, so to speak, tornado, high wind, stuff like that, if it's negligence and he didn't take good care of it and the pole rotted off at the bottom, fell down, and not going to replace it. But other than that, I see those would be the only changes that I would see in the thing there. And I think we're maybe discussing about something that's a probability of less than 1%, here. So I don't really have.
This is hard. I think the question is, are you keeping the nonconformities of the signs the same as the rest of the nonconformities in the county? Or are you going to have specific requirements for nonconformities in signs?
Yeah.
Right now, for instance, if you had a mobile home in a zoning district, and then we rezone that area and it is no longer allowed, what you have is a legal nonconforming use. If you needed to replace that home, you would be able to do so within a 6-month period without losing your grandfather clause. The question is, do you think that grandfathering clause should not apply to signs?
Now, let me throw another side of that to you, Doc. On the signs is, I'm a businessman, and this guy was here before me, so he's got a much larger sign than what I can have now because I came in under new ordinance, maybe stricter. So the fellow that I'm competing with, his sign goes away, but he can put it back up where instead of having the same size as my sign and competing on an equal field. And
yes,
that's just another argument that I'm putting out there.
yes, and I think that in the general scope of things, and this is my opinion, not directing this to the board so much trying to influence their opinion.
No.
But in my opinion, I think it kind of depends on the situation. Can you replace it with a conforming sign? Because obviously it's always better to be conforming. If you can replace it with a conforming sign, then that's good. But there could be situations that arise where you can't put any sign back because it would be non-conforming. So for instance, if we rezoned an area that has a commercial business in it right now that's residential, and now commercial businesses aren't allowed, and a tornado comes through and blows that man's commercial sign down for his business, we'd be saying you can't put any sign back because your entire use of this property is non-conforming.
And that's where you go to the BZA for a variance.
Yes, I agree. That's why I'm saying it kind of depends on the situation, in my opinion.
Now, bear in mind that the unlike land uses, these sign regulations are related to the use of the property. So if you have a non-conforming commercial use in some zoning district, it's still a commercial use. The sign regulations would apply to your business as a commercial use, even though the use itself is non-conforming. And so the sign that could be replaced on this property, could certainly be, in conformance with the commercial sign requirements. And B, I think the real question on this particular section is, can you put a new non-conforming sign up in place of the previous non-conforming sign because it wasn't your fault that the hurricane blew it down? Something along those lines. I did like the idea of a time limit, like other non-conforming uses, that you can't resume them after a certain amount of time and that sort of thing. Maybe that we should say that the replacement sign has got to go up within 3 months or something along those lines.
I definitely agree with the time limit.
Yeah.
We don't want it to put a burden on someone, but time limit, just like we got, in other non-conforming.
Yeah.
So I think we need to do some work on that, on the rest of the committee, thinking about it, but we need to consider that. Any more comments? What we're gonna go with?
I don't have any more.
So,
Well, I didn't hear a consensus. Do y'all want us to just kind of hold this until further discussion, or?
Well, whenever I look down at 7.11.4.2, abandoned signs.
Uh-huh.
The non-conforming sign or sign structure has not been in use and has been vacated for a period of 3 months or longer, it loses its non-conforming status.
Yeah.
That 3 months fits dovetails in with that regulation.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, yeah.
Boy, you see a bunch of those old signs that are floating around. They're almost historical items out there, really. Some of them's been there for years, and that business has went out of business in 1948.
Good gracious. I don't think it's a legal non-conforming use anymore.
We'd like to get rid of that.
Yeah, I know it's something kept up for school there.
So what do we want to do here, guys? Mr. Chairman?
Well, to me, what we have right now, what we have is looking to me would be reasonable to, leave it like it is right now.
If I could weigh in, I tend to think the signs when non-conforming should be the same as all other non-conformities. If it's abandoned or derelict, destroyed, or removed, there's a 6-month period to replace it in the state that it previously was in. And if that time elapses, it is necessary to be conforming with any future signs.
I would agree with
The
that.
6 months fine. 6 months fine with me.
Well, on that 711 3.3, would it help this thing if we replaced, where we say where changed conditions beyond the control of the owner? Maybe this should say as the result of an act of God. Make it clear that owner had, he didn't have anything to do with whatever calamity knocked that sign over or damaged it beyond repair.
If I'm correct, an act of God typically means usually a weather disaster.
Yeah.
Or unforeseen circumstance. Would someone crashing a vehicle into a sign be considered an act of God? I would think not.
Yeah, you're right.
So in that instance, a gentleman who has a sign advertising his business and someone crashes into it, it now has to be replaced as a conforming sign.
Yeah, you're right. Beyond the control of the owner probably makes more sense in those kinds of situations where lightning didn't strike it, but some guy on the highway did.
Yeah, that's my thought there, because that could create potential issues. I could also see, I don't want us to also have situations where if the sign's in bad condition and they want to replace it, but in order to replace it, they'd have to put a conforming sign. So therefore they just leave the sign in a bad state present on the property because they don't want to erect a conforming sign. I think of that as well.
Uh-huh.
I feel so. I think we should leave it like it is.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I'm just one person.
You want to call for a vote, Mr. Chairman?
We can. Let's see how many. If everyone want to vote on it, I recommend that we leave it like it is. All in favor? Say by aye.
I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone real quick.
Do we have any nays on it?
Would you read it again? Read it as it is.
I kind of like the idea of putting a time limit in there.
Yeah,
If we
okay.
put the time limit, let's go with 6 months then.
Okay.
I think we should go with 3 months to tie it in with abandoned signs, and then I think I'd be all for it then.
Okay, that's good.
I agree with that. 3 months.
I can live with that. I think that's
All in favor of 3 months?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Do you have any nays? No, okay, we'll go with the 3 months. Leave it like it is. All righty. Any more on that? I think we about wind it up. You have anything else, John, on this one?
I'm just putting a note in there right now. Okay, what we have yellowed out, there were several comments, including most of Tommy's comments, that those edits can easily be made. We will prepare those edits and bring this back to you again in following meetings. But I think that we've got most of the signed ordinances pretty much done. I'd say it's probably about 95% plus done based upon your comments today.
Okay.
And if that's acceptable, Mr. Burt, that we will go ahead and make those changes. And then we'll bring that version back at the next meeting, or actually before the next meeting, so that staff and the committee can review it.
Yes, sir, that's fine with me. That's fine.
Thank you.
Right. Kevin, you have anything else?
Yes, I have one last item before we adjourn. Technically, our LMO meeting schedule concluded in March. We had a meeting canceled and that was rescheduled and has now being made up today as the postponed meeting. I would like to get, as a vote from the committee, an extension to the schedule. I've laid out in your agenda to confirm a May 26th meeting, which would be later this month on the 4th Tuesday, and a June 23rd meeting, which would be the 4th Tuesday of June, as we have been meeting. I'm gonna, if y'all have no issue with that, it'd be good for us if I could have an official extension of that schedule as a vote from the committee.
Okay, committee members, you heard what Kevin said. Is that agreeable with everyone to we'll meet on May the 26th and on June the 23rd? Is that agreeable with everyone?
I'm in agreement.
I'm in agreement.
In agreement, yes.
Okay. Any negatives? No nays? Okay. That Kevin, we'll go with that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And we'll let the y'all set up what condition we do it, what we'll see what time, ever take it on day basis, day by day basis on whether we meet like we did tonight or whether we had a public meeting.
I believe that we would keep it as a 5 p.m. meeting. I suspect that the May 26th meeting will be done in the same fashion as this one. And hopefully by June we'll be meeting in person, but we will play it by ear as what is best for the county and for the citizens.
Okay, good. If all minds are clear, we appreciate your participation tonight meeting, and Kevin will keep us informed and well at the county. And we'll call this meeting adjourned and appreciate whatever they've done. Have a good, blessed day.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. All.
Everybody.